Welcome to the Scandinavian Mind podcast, our weekly show about how technology is changing the creative industries. Today on the program, how to navigate the fashion industry in 2024. We recently traveled to Antwerp and the yearly design event Flanders DC, where we met some of the fashion industry's most forward-thinking people. So in this episode, we will hear from Dr. Hanna Grabenhofer, Associate Partner at McKinsey Co.Valérie and Valérie Boiten, Senior Policy Officer at Ellen MacArthur Foundation. These were wide-ranging conversations about the transformation of the fashion industry, covering, amongst other things, what new technologies you need to navigate our uncertain industry, a look at the recently published The State of Fashion report, and the new legislations from the EU, specifically the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products. My name is Konrad Olsson, Editor-in-Chief and founder of Scandinavian Mind, and I'm here with our Editor-at-Large and our man on the ground in Antwerp, Mr. Oliver Dahle. Welcome back, Oliver.
Thank you very much.
Super excited about doing this talk. I always love when you are out and about in Europe covering the industry for us. I think we need to start with explaining what this is really. Flanders DC in Antwerp. Talk about this event.
So, first of all, Flanders DC is the organization behind the event, which is the organization that works for the design and fashion industries within the Flemish region in Belgium. And they every year has event in which they invite people that discuss the industries. So every other year it's a focus on fashion and design consecutively. And this year there was the fashion talks, and which then was followed by the Belgian Fashion Awards. And this event then looks fashion industry at large. What problems does it have? How are we able to solve these problems? Uh, how could we uh, look at the fashion industry and get a sustainable fashion industry that will flourish in the years to come? So there were speakers and panel talks and breakout sessions in which you could meet consultancy firms, tech companies, creatives, designers, and it was a very holistic view on fashion in general.
Well, we're going to get to the conversations, and I'm so happy to have people from both these organizations on the podcast. I've been wanting to have them on for a long time, and so happy you were able to grab Hanna and Valérie. But judging from the photographs I've seen, the event looked really professional. It's a beautiful location. Can you give us some more texture on being there, being in Antwerp? Obviously, legendary city for avant-garde fashion since a few decades ago. What were your kind of impressions coming into the city and this event?
First of all, Antwerp, the city, I've never been there, which has obviously I have this interest in fashion, looking at what I'm doing, and it's been sort of a dream coming there and see what's the fuss about, what's happening there. And honestly, it exceeded my expectations. It's quite small, first of all, but there is this creative energy, and everywhere you go, you have this amazing shops and designers, and everyone's very friendly, and there's this um, like energy and attitude of basically people supporting each other, and how you would like to carry each other forward together. No matter if you're bigger designer name or an up and coming designer, or if you're somewhat connected to the Royal Academy, in which all of these legendary designers are coming from. So Antwerp as a city, amazing. And as you said, there is so many avant-garde designers coming from there, which is quite obvious looking at it in that sense.
Yeah, we just mentioned them quickly. We're talking the Dries van Noten, Ander Mühlemeister, Dirk Bickenbergs, a couple of others as well, right?
Yeah, Walter van Beirendonck, Martin Margiela. There's a long list
Yeah, yeah.
which have made a huge mark on how we perceive fashion today. So the event, it's a huge event that gathers all these different parts of the value chain that is connected to fashion. And I think it's very valuable to have all these conversations. Like, how do you look at creativity? How can you perceive fashion as like a cultural force, but also more technical things like how could we sustainably like work in fashion? What are needed, and how could we have like a sustainable growth and things like this, which is becoming more and more important for every day.
Let's get into your conversations because these are topics that you were able to talk to Hanna from McKinsey and Valérie from MacArthur. Let's start with Hanna Grabenhofer. What were your takeaways from your conversation with Hanna?
So Hanna is associate partner at McKinsey, and she is based in Vienna and came to Antwerp to present the newly released The State of Fashion. And The State of Fashion looks into how is the fashion industry doing, what will be happening in the upcoming year, what will be important to focus on, and which focus areas and technologies will be fundamental to navigate the upcoming fashion landscape, especially in these days when we could see that people are spending less money on clothing and apparel, also looking at when it's more instability within the world in general.
All right, let's hear it. Here now, Oliver Dahle in conversation with Dr. Hanna Grabenhofer, associate partner at McKinsey Co.
How is fashion industry currently doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to look at it, the time before COVID, then kind of the time during, directly after, and the time now, where people for basically a year and a half have been waiting for recovery. And 2021 was a year that was doing really well, but actually worse versus what people were expecting in terms of recovery. And then 2022, so basically it was going worse than they expected. So they kind of went on the brakes, stopped buying merchandise, all that. And the first half year kind of went better, 2023. So people kind of bought again, thought it was finally over. And now the second half year is super bad again. So people are all over the place in terms of, is it now picking up again? Is it not picking up again? We stop buying, we buy more. So everyone is sitting on tons and tons of inventory that's basically killing their balance sheets. And that against an outlook where now for next year, we do have to say that it will be relatively muted on average. So it's a tricky situation where everyone's kind of longing for finally some relief, but it's not necessarily coming. I don't want to be super gloomy about it because it's coming in certain places, in certain niches. You have to be almost like surgical about identifying where the pockets of growth still are. But on average, it's not going to be a growth that's based on volumes as it has been in the past.
And how should the brands navigate through these like pockets?
Well, so first of all, it's kind of knowing and finding out what these pockets are. That's where the report can be helpful. That's where also kind of looking at your internal situation will be helpful in knowing what you're personally as a company are able to do.
We are currently living in very uncertain times, and we have been for a while. How should brands tackle these things looking ahead?
Yeah. the more closer you can bring the time when you take a decision on something to the time when it actually happens, the better, right? But that's where we're a bit back to the fast fashion formula, where you have players that basically, like a Shein drops 10,000 new products in a week at time in super small quantities just to test what picks up. Then they produce it, and within another 2 weeks, they have it online in bulk, right? So if you operate like that, it can be easier to navigate the uncertainty. Now, I wouldn't necessarily want to propagate that fast fashion model because it has a whole bunch of other implications we don't necessarily want to promote. But being reactive and being able to quickly kind of change course is what you're going to have to somehow learn to do. Because in the end, you can use all the modeling and predictive analytics you want. No one knows how exactly it will plan out.
And I guess this must be very hard, especially within fashion, which is an industry that isn't very agile like traditional.
No, it isn't. What's interesting to me is lately I've had a lot of projects with clients around inventory management, because I mentioned earlier, everyone's sitting just on piles and piles of stuff. And it's dangerous for balance sheets. You have a lot of cash bound. But it's also interesting if you're able to change your perspective on it and you say, maybe I don't have to reproduce the newest collections all the time, but I kind of use what I have. I kind of try to understand what I have where and where that could be helpful still. I can actually decrease my buy for the next season, but put the stuff where it will work. The hard thing there is that the stuff will not necessarily work where you have it right now. So you might have to reshuffle, so it's again an operational hassle. But that's one thing we see that's actually interesting, how you manage your inventory in a way that it kind of informs your future collections without destroying it or getting rid of it in the off-price channels.
And do you see that brands are starting to adapt more with their inventory, or that they
I think there's just this polarization, if you will, of how brands are doing, and it's totally driven by how well they've been able to execute against these things. So it's not necessarily a thing like, do I adapt now and then it will be better? But it's just this, for years now, this is the super winner thing. The industry has been going through it. There's a couple of people killing it, and then there's the bulk of the market that's really challenged. And the bulk of the market so far has kind of been okay because there's still been consumer spend, and now that's kind of breaking down, because in the end, the industry growth depends a lot more on pieces than on actual price and sales. So are they adapting? I want to be positive about it and say, yes, there's many things you can do. And I mean, we've seen with the Gen AI thing that actually more than 60% of fashion executives we've interviewed last year have already worked with Gen AI this year, which is actually, I think, a decent number. And then next year it will be 90 likely. But against that, it's undeniable that this proliferation of a couple of players who are going to get stronger and stronger, and then the bulk who's going to keep having the same challenges. I think that's strong. The only thing I might add to that is that if you, for instance, would use AI as kind of a game-changing moment, release all that you've been doing, focus on that, or sustainability, you could almost plan out the same way, right? And you use those big challenges or inflection points to fully reposition the way you do business. Maybe that could be something. But in reality, big traditional companies have sometimes a hard time.
Like you're mentioning AI, could you see any other future trends that will be important?
Well, I think the two biggest ones that will shape the industry are the compliance with sustainability regulation and the AI. Just because that they are not targeting any specific department or thing a fashion company does. It targets the entire value chain. You basically cannot leave any stone unturned. It's really challenging, and you're creating a completely new world order almost against that. So those are the two big ones. And then, of course, there's smaller ones like the influencer, how you use influencers. The shift towards brand marketing, frankly, I think will be really hard for many because in the end, there's so many players, especially mid-market, where you've been trapped in unclear value propositions. If you don't know what you're about, your brand marketing will be very ineffective and you're going to blow a lot of money. So that's also going to be challenging to act on.
What do you think brands now need to focus on?
So I think they should focus, number one, I still think sustainability and Gen AI are two big ones you can't get around because there's an urgency attached to that. When it comes to sustainability, the regulations kick in from 2026. But if you don't secure kind of access to that ecosystem, if you will, right now, you're going to lose out then, right?
Yeah.
So we see certain large players creating a lot of M&A based purchases to actually integrate parts of a sustainable circular value chain, because otherwise they're never going to be able to actually have suppliers who can keep up with their targets that they set for themselves to deliver sustainable product. And then AI is also interesting because it will build up year after year. And if you start learning and you start getting into the game, I think you'll be better positioned when it becomes deeply embedded into what you're going to have to do to succeed.
You mentioned legislation, and if you speak with a lot of NGOs, sustainability advocates, they say that legislation is needed to actually transform the industry. And if you speak with brands, they say the same thing. We need legislation to actually change something. Now it's coming, but brands are not really up to the test yet, what it feels like. What is your point of view?
That's true. I have a lot of conversations on that lately, that people just feel they now see that they will have to comply, but they lack the capability and the access to, cleaner supply chain vendors to actually do it. And they at times lack the capability for the organizational change that will have to come with it, right? Because in the end, it will impact all the different parts of the value chain. It will impact the type of materials you use, the type of materials you source. It will impact, you can start from design, how you design to optimize for those materials, but also optimize for sell-through potentially or for longevity. So there's so many nuances to it. Then there's the whole transportation part of it. Where does it go? There's the whole resource intensity in the raw materials creation that's very often not even looked at when you look end to end, because where you start looking is kind of you buy a fabric and then I work with a producer, right? But actually half of the impact sits even before that in cotton production and raw materials production. So it's really a matter of being up for the challenge, feeling kind of smart enough about it, having the capability to move the organization. And the hard thing about it, because there's so many small, cool companies, especially here in the Benelux, pioneering super cool solutions and doing really great stuff. But if you think about having to do it at scale, if you go through any regular high street, you look at the players there and you say, at scale, all of this volume needs to shift towards sustainable production. That's a whole different game than running, local, than pioneering solutions locally in smaller companies.
But do you think that the bigger companies could win market shares if they are starting to adapt more and more to the upcoming legislation?
So you can think about it two ways, right? Do I win market share or do I protect myself from losing market share? I think the latter is the more realistic one right now. When you look at consumer data, it's always hard to really tell, is sustainable product really a purchasing criterion, right? You have a lot of issues with greenwashing. You see fast fashion skyrocketing at the moment. So I find it sometimes hard to fully follow an argument of it's a differentiator. It also shouldn't be. It should be mandatory. It should be a hygiene factor. So that's why I think it's good that you have the legislation coming in to create an even playing field, if you will.
What do you think brands and people operating within fashion what's the main takeaways from the report?
I have to think about it because we always have many, but if I want to bring it down to just one, I think try and focus on the right things. There's so many things you could be doing, but there's not maybe as many things that you should be doing. And you need to look more internally than in the market. If the market is relatively stagnant, it doesn't help you to look at what competition is doing. It doesn't help you to see where are the growth pockets in the market. You need to look internally and say, what am I about? Can I do well? Or where do I have my biggest issues? Where do I leave the most potential on the table? Then ideally I can match it to say, okay, what's going out there and how is it aligned? But I think against a market like this, I would start looking more internally.
All right, that was our conversation with Hanna Grabenhofer, associate partner at McKinsey Co., recorded in Antwerp a few weeks ago. Oliver, you were also able to speak with Valérie Boiten, senior policy officer of MacArthur Foundation. Talk about this conversation and maybe explain MacArthur Foundation for people who are not aware about the work that they're doing.
So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation works and develops, promotes this idea of a circular economy. And they are working with both businesses, academia, policymakers, and institutions across the globe. And Valerie, she's senior policy officer within the foundation. And we had this talk about first of all, where she sees the fashion industry are doing today. How is fashion? But then we are getting more into all these upcoming legislations that are happening all over the world, and we also get to hear a little bit about what she's most excited for in terms of all the upcoming policies that will be coming from the European Union.
Yeah, good stuff. Obviously, this is right up our alley. We've been covering this in our feed and on our conference the past year. Super interesting to have Valérie Boiten, Senior Policy Officer at MacArthur, on the podcast. Here now, our conversation with Valérie.
What are your view on the fashion industry today?
I think if you look globally, we see a rise in production and consumption that is not changing, and it's unlikely to go away. Also, if you realize there's growing middle classes in countries like India and China and so on, we do see this trajectory of growing production and growing consumption. The problem with that is the fashion industry is largely based on finite resources, in the sense that we largely rely on new resources, new polyester, new polyamide, new cotton. I think 97% of the fibers entering the system are new. And so we have very low levels of recirculating our materials and our products. And I mentioned the underutilization as well. We know, especially in Europe, it's difficult to have very accurate figures on that, but there are some figures saying that we tend to throw our garments away after 7 or 8 times having worn them. That's, of course, just one research, and it's really hard to get to the specifics. But I think there's a general tendency of underutilization. And that's also a bit because the economics are missing at times. It's really hard to make a business case out of post-consumption materials. It's really, it's very hard to compete with linear models in which you just place a new product on the market, that product is sold, and then as a company, your duty or your job basically ends there. If you want to take that product back and sort it and clean it and repair it or recirculate that, you have a very different type of operations. You have different challenges and so on, and you're basically operating in a system that was designed to accommodate that linear model that just sells it on, and that's where the journey ends. So that's really a struggle, I think, and we're just at the starting point of changing that very system. I don't know if that answers your questions fully. I think we're seeing more political attention paid to the fashion industry more than ever before, especially in Europe, but also in places like the US. Australia now has a voluntary clothing stewardship scheme. They have a big strategy to tackle things like design, to collect more textiles after use, and so on. So we see different policy initiatives being put in place, and I think that's really interesting and promising. But at the same time, we're still at that first level of tabling initiatives, making proposals, setting out visions. We haven't fully started implementing all of these things yet, and that's of course where the real challenges will come to the fore.
Like you said, we see so much legislation, policies being formed. Do you think brands are ready for what is coming?
Well, I think partly it is new for brands, and I think historically they haven't been organized in the same way that other industries have, in terms of having a presence, being very informed of the policy developments, and being able to not just stay informed, but also, share their views, formulate their views, and so on. And I think because of the novelty of this policy agenda, the industry itself is still trying to organize itself and really understand what is happening. So I think it's fair to say there is still this bit, wait and see mode, because it is new and because a lot of these things are in development, but as I said, they're not being implemented just yet. And for many things, for example, on EPR or on eco-design, proposals have been made, but we don't have the final political agreement on them yet. So they're not at the point of becoming legislation just yet. So we're in this in-between mode. So I can understand that people don't feel fully ready for it, but that's also quite hard because it hasn't been fully nailed, as in this is the new law and these are the articles and these are the duties and obligations. And I think that's the beauty and the art of politics, that it's a negotiation. So I think this is actually the moment to help shape those proposals and to help inform them.
Yeah. The fashion industry is not doing well and is not sustainable today, but we still have thousands of jobs. People are operating within fashion. And how could you sustainably legislate the fashion industry as it looks today?
So I don't know how familiar you are with the EU textile strategy. That's probably the reference point at the moment. The EU textile strategy, which came out last year, has a vision for the European textile system by 2030. For textiles to be consumed in the EU, to be durable, to be recyclable, and to be, as they say, to a great extent made of recycled fibers. That is the larger scale vision. Of course, that's a vision, that's a dream, or like an ideal end state. And it is we do need to really work on the economics of that circular model and of that circular dream in a way. And I think that's something we shouldn't lose sight of. There is a very real economic opportunity, and there's a lot of jobs that can be created in collecting products, in sorting them, in repairing them, which are all very labor-intense jobs, basically, or tasks to do, in reusing them, renting products out. There's a whole variety of business models that can be explored. But of course, to get there and to make those models economically viable, we do need to change the overarching framework that really, in part or to a large extent, determines the economic viability of these models. And that relates to things like our fiscal policies. Given that many of these models are very labor intense, we need to be ready to reflect on the taxation burden that we have on labor in the EU. We know that the taxation of pollution and taxation of resources, especially finite resources or virgin resources, that's a very low taxation burden if you compare it to the taxation burden on labor. So there is a debate, I think, that needs to happen on that front. We know that we need to design our products differently. At the moment, there aren't really any standardized approaches to what is durability, what does that mean, what does good look like, how do you measure it, how do you prove that your product is durable and is able to withstand, let's say, 50 or 60 washes or something, but it has resistance to abrasion and all of that. We have no common standard, and it would be great if at least the minimum standard becomes mandatory by law, so that we have like a unique or like one level playing field, and all products have the same minimum level of durability, so that they can last longer and they can actually be used repeatedly by several consumers, which also offers business model opportunities. Because you take a product back, you bring it to another consumer, you take it back again, and so on. And the same goes for recyclability. Then there's another aspect around waste. We don't have the infrastructure currently set up to deal with textile waste very well. We have low levels of collection capacity and sorting capacity in the EU. As I mentioned, less than 1% of our textile products are recycled back into new textile products. So there's a lot of work to be done on that front to, as you said, to make this transition sustainable and to create jobs in that process. We'll need some capital investment to create the system. And then once that system is up and running, it will generate a huge amount of jobs and economic opportunities. But we need that transition mode of really having a clear vision and making the investments that are required.
Yeah. So looking at it in a bigger picture, it's rather a reformation of the fashion industry than degrowth. And like to...
Well, it depends a bit. There are so many interpretations of degrowth. So for us, a circular economy is based on eliminating waste and pollution, circulating products and materials, and regenerating natural systems. And when you say circulating products and materials, it means that jacket that you have on, for example, you keep it in use for as long as possible. So you may be tired of it, but it goes to someone else in a circular economy. That means at that moment, it displaces the purchase of something new, and you basically shrink or degrow the production of new items in a circular economy. You minimize the production of new items, you minimize the use of new resources because you keep what you have in use for as long as possible. In a way that is degrowing the production of new items. So in a way that is compatible with degrowth. But I think what we really want to advocate for is a circular economy. It has the word economy in the word. It needs to make economic sense.
Yeah.
To pass your jacket on to someone else. There is a value in that jacket. We know that. There is design value. So much labor went in it. There's the resources. But that value currently has low economic value because of the system that we're in. And we need to transform that wider system so that the materials value also has an economic value, and you get something back for giving your jacket to someone else, or to give it to a company, and a company is willing to compensate you for it because there is this value in the jacket.
But with all these legislations that now are in the works, which ones are you most excited for?
I like the eco-design proposal a lot. So that's the eco-design for sustainable products regulation by the Commission, because it is so fundamental to tackle. If you want to tackle the environmental impact of a product, you need to look at how it is designed. Basically, most of the decisions are made at the design stage, and also because at the moment, especially in fashion, there is such a huge diversity in terms of products and materials and material mixes. It's nowhere comparable to these bottles, for example, where you have some level of predictability on. It will be more or less 100% glass or 100% PET. It won't be like in fashion we see products with polyamide and nylon and polyester and cotton all in the same fabric, not even the same product, but just one fabric. And then a jacket, for example, has several layers and so on. So it's super, super complex. And in order to make life easier and to make the economics work for disassembly, for repair, for recycling, you need to standardize these approaches a little bit more, standardize durability, design for recycling, design for disassembly a bit more. So I think that's really a huge opportunity to do that, so that we don't have this huge mixed bag of materials. It's really hard to make money out of that as a recycler or as someone who's trying to bring them back into circulation, be it through reuse, repair, remaking, or recycling.
That was Valérie Boiten, Senior Policy Officer of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, interviewed by our own Oliver Dahle in Antwerp. Oliver, there were other conversations you had on site that we aren't able to get to in this episode. We have one upcoming episode. We're going to share a conversation with Eugene Brabkin, very famous journalist, would you say thought leader in the fashion industry. What can you tease about our conversation with Eugene that we'll publish on the new year?
As you said, Eugene is a thought leader within the fashion industry. And the conversations we've heard from today have been very technical and looking into the more business side of fashion and how you could navigate that side of the industry. With Eugene, the talk is much more about the cultural relevance of fashion what is fashion? Is there any relevance left in fashion today? So it's more from that sort of perspective, and how you could build cultural relevance connected to it.
We'll let that be a cliffhanger till the next year. We'll publish that conversation sometime in January. Oliver, thank you so much for doing this reporting for us. This will be the second to last episode of this year. So I have to ask, Oliver, what's on your wish list? What do you want to see under the Christmas tree on Christmas Eve? Is it any fashion, jewelry? What are you looking forward to?
Not really. And this goes very much back to all these conversations that you have around surrounding sustainability and things like that. And I've recently picked up a new hobby, which is mending all my clothes. So maybe like sewing machine. That would be nice.
All right, we'll send that straight to Santa Claus in the north of Finland. We have little of 1 week left, so we'll see if you get that. This has been the Scandinavian Mind podcast with me, Konrad Olsson, and our dear colleague Oliver Dahle. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. Visit scandinavianmind.com/newsletter not to miss out on any upcoming and future events. Until next week, bye.